Hey guys, Mitch Bell here. Listen, this week has been horrific with the midair crash of a Army H-60 along with an Envoy American Airlines regional RJ 700 right there at the Potomac. The hard thing for pilots is to realize that could have happened to any one of us. Um, I want to know what's going on, and I really get sick of you do get some podcasts, you get a lot of speculation, a lot of what if. And as I tell my dad, whenever there's an aviation accident, Dad, we're not going to know what happened. Hell, I think they probably hit a UFO. He goes, what? I go, it might as well be a UFO until they get the black box and they do a thorough investigation on it. But to really alleviate some of the questions and I've heard some crazy conspiracy theories. I've heard all sorts of stuff. I mean, even my son this morning came up to talk to me about, "Hey, Dad, did you hear the helicopter was holding up north of the airport, and then it went directly into the airplane? I think it was intentional." And I'm like, "Son, it wasn't intentional." And I had an hour-long conversation with Eric Roth this morning as I was out walking, and I got to tell you, I wanted Eric so badly to that have been live, but all day long, a lot of things in life going on with chemotherapy and cancer and stuff with my dad. So let that out there. Wasn't able to do it. So Eric, what did I say? Eric, God, Austin. Sorry, Austin. Um, I want to say thank you first of all for you're one of our RTAG guys, and for those that don't know it, RTAG is a um, aviation charity started up by a bunch of Army warrant officers, and they get helicopter pilots, multi-engine time, get them over into, yep, and get them over into, I've got RTAG around here somewhere, um, to the airlines, into the regionals, and then over to the main line. So it's a path that was probably not allowed years ago, but now it is. And so if I have a question about something aviation helicopter related because I'm a KC-130 guy. I call my cadre of guys that I know, and in this case, Austin this morning. I'm like, Austin, let's talk about this. And he goes, "You got a couple minutes?" I go, "Yeah, I'm out walking 3.5 miles. Let's talk." So, Austin, first of all, as we put this disclaimer out, we do not represent our views or anything we talk about does not represent any company out there. It is solely ours. And first of all, I know you feel the same way, but our hearts and prayers goes out to all the families right now that are still waiting notification, both military and um, civilian. So, with that being said, Austin, give us a breakdown and talk to us about your experience because the reason I think it's important, you actually flew in that unit. You went up and down the Potomac a million times. You understand what's going on, and you can probably um, talk to this. And if people have questions, put them up here. And while we're on live, I will answer the questions, get Austin to answer the questions. But Austin, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so thanks for the disclaimer, Taco. Yeah, I'll start maybe with my background in the military, which will kind of make everything else make sense, and then my post-military background. Um, start off in the infantry, spent almost 9 years in the infantry. Finally got smart, got eye surgery, and moved over to being a Black Hawk pilot. Went to flight school 11 and 12. Um, got to know one of the RTAG OGs, Jim McClung, when we served together at Fort Campbell and in Afghanistan as medevac pilots. So as a Black Hawk guy, spent most of my time in the Mike model Black Hawk, which is the newer one. I do have some Lima time too, both in flight school and in Egypt. Um, and then my last duty assignment after Egypt was at Fort Belvoir. I retired out of Fort Belvoir. But one of the important things to note as well is Andrew Eves, the instructor pilot who was in Pat 25 when it crashed, was there. Basically, he and I were there for the whole time together. He preceded me by a couple months, and then he PCS'd and went down to Honduras. Then came back to Fort Belvoir, flying that same mission, just in a different company, and moved from the Mike model, the newer model Blackhawk, to the Lima, the older one. And so then I retired. I've been at two airlines since then. So uh, guys like you and guys like Jim McClung kind of drug me. Eric Savston and Josh kind of got to know all those guys, and they kind of drug me into the airlines. I wouldn't say kicking and screaming, but convinced me. And then I've been had a fast career, and um, so I'm on my second airline now, one of the legacy carriers. So I'm just kind of at a unique point where I'm fairly recently retired, summer of 2023. No one of the pilots there was in that unit, flying the same aircraft, and then also the airliner side.
So let's talk about this. Here's a shot of one of your birds from the 12th Aviation Battalion,
Yeah.
and these birds, I mean, they're stock H60s. Are there anything special on the gold top versions versus a regular go out and fly an Army H60?
Yeah, so these are all that battalion has three line companies. The three line companies, Alpha Company, which is the company that I was in and served with Andrew. Actually, Andrew in that picture is the guy holding the guy on his shoulders there with a big smile on his face, which is pretty typical. Um, so there's only four of the gold tops, the VH60 mics in the Army. Those are all in the Mike Model Company and Alpha Company. Um,
Mhm.
they are a little bit unique, but not wholly unique. They're essentially an HH60, which is the same thing as the Medevac. So if you look at some of the parts on there, it actually says HH60 on it. They are a VH60 because they've got a special interior, but there's no special qualification. There's no, the operator's manual is the same for the HH60 and the VH60. There's no VH60 operator's manual. Um, so some of the stuff in the back in the cargo compartment is different. It's got fancy interiors with other seats and stuff like that. But
So
essentially,
wait,
they're HH60s.
when you say VH, so it's like VIP.
Yeah, VIP. So that's that unit's primary mission set is VIP and continuity government mission.
Okay, so we're like going into DC. You guys are flying all around P-56 and whatnot then.
Oh yeah, yeah. And actually, when I went to the airlines, obviously P-56 is a big deal, and they don't know your background when you're going through training. So the couple times I've gone through training, they're like, oh, and make sure you avoid P-56, and I was like, I've landed in P-56. They're like, oh, make sure you're super aware of it, and I was like, I'm pretty aware of it.
P-56, for
So
those that don't know, is there's a designation around the Capitol, the White House, the Vice President's house, and you can't fly through that airspace. So when you take off going north out of DCA, you have to do an immediate left-hand turn to, is it 326 or something like that, to avoid that area. And if you hit the river and you don't think about it and don't turn, it's too late. Secret Service is going to pull you aside and have a nice
yeah, if
long
you if you
debrief
see
with
if
you.
you see blue and then green, you should have stopped while it was still blue. So
Yeah.
you're on the wrong side.
Well, no. So, given your mission set, what you guys do, I've got a deal we could pull up, right? And why don't you talk through what you guys do when you're when you're flying? So, if you guys can see the picture on here, it's a shot of the Potomac River, Washington National Airport, and it shows some of the helicopter routes. So, kind of talk us through the information.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really kind of hard to wrap your mind around, and also I think this is important to point out too. I know I'm kind of getting off topic here. I didn't wake up this morning planning on doing any podcasts, any news interviews or anything like that. I didn't seek any out. People asked me. One of the reasons why I said yes, and one of the reasons why I was kind of going hard in the paint online on some of this stuff is because there's a lot of bad and misinformation, kind of like you said in the intro. And ordinarily, I'd be able to stay out of it. But in this case, I just wanted to be able to defend my friend because he's worth it. I wouldn't do that for
Yeah.
everybody. I'm sure that you've been around for a long time. There's a lot of times where crashes like this happen, and you look at it and they go, "Well, yeah, that guy was always kind of a hot dog," or "Well, it was only a matter of time that person got into this kind of
Yeah.
situation." This is not one of those. This is a top five draft pick, cream of the crop, smart guy, well liked, jovial and fun to be around. And you liked it when you walked into ops and he was in there. Good at flight planning. If I was putting a flight planning team together, he'd be right up there.
Mhm.
Good at flying, experience in the area. It's like good at risk mitigation. wouldn't take chances unnecessarily. So this is like not that situation where you look at it and go, I kind of see it happening, or that wouldn't have happened to me because I wouldn't have done some of the stuff that maybe he would have done. This is one of the
Sure.
situations where I'm like, he probably would have done all the stuff that I would have done. You know,
You probably would
um,
have been there as well. It's really hard when you're watching the initial videos, and now more have come out that show the helicopter as it's going straight into the side of the airplane. Um, one of the things that we talked about today is the media and unfortunately President Trump, as he's talking about different stuff within the FAA. You and I both know they'll turn you and they'll go, you've got traffic at 10 o'clock, 2 miles, blah, blah, blah. Call the traffic, call the airfield. And as soon as you say, I've got the traffic, airport in sight, that responsibility is now off the controller's shoulders. He doesn't, he is fighting the next alligator closest to the canoe,
yeah.
or these guys bunching up on each other. Talk about that. You were kind of going through that and what a typical flight would be for you.
Yeah, so you can bring up that picture again. I think it'll maybe help people. Again, you just have to have so many kind of different knowledge bases to wrap your head around the whole thing. I'm not special. I just happened to kind of be in all those places and relatively recently. So all the blue kind of highlighter looking lines around there. Those are all the different helicopter routes. Look like much like anywhere else where you'd have MEAs or whatever. They've got altitudes associated with them. You can see down
Mhm.
by Wilson Bridge, kind of on the bottom third of that, where the two kind of blue highlighter lines intersect. There's a 200 with a line above it, a 300 with a line above it. Just for anybody that's not aviation that's watching this, the line above it means that's a max altitude. Um, and so those altitudes are kind of prescribed all over the area. And essentially, what you have is DC's airspace, and then separate from that Dulles, and then on the other side of that, to the northeast and also due east, you've got Andrews, and then north of that, you've got Baltimore. So this is a cutaway from a map that's probably 10 plus times bigger than this.
Mhm.
It's really expansive, and so on any given day, you could be flying through a lot of those different routes. Essentially, the routes all step down. So Davison Army Airfield, where they would have left from, is under the Class Bravo shelf of DCA. So you take off under the Class Bravo, and then pretty much immediately, once you get outside of Davison's airspace, you're in the Class Bravo, and you're flying on the routes.
And you're under
And the
radar
routes,
control?
no, because you're going to be at some point too low. So initially they'll have radar contact, but
Right.
they are not controlling you that way because they are clearing you along that route.
Okay.
And so when you clear, basically you would call in where the point that you're at and what your route request is, and they approve that route request. So
Okay.
you'd say, hey, request route 3, route 1, route 3, route 1, route 4, whatever, and now you're cleared to do all of that stuff. Um, as you get closer into DCA, those altitudes step down. And so it starts, I think, at 1,300 feet closer to Davison. As you come in, one of the corridors takes you up one of the routes takes you up 95, essentially. Those all step down, and then 200 is the lowest of the altitudes. The idea being then that the helicopter traffic is going to be below the airline traffic at any given point.
Right.
Um, so that's kind of what you would normally be doing, and you could fly, all the way from there up to Baltimore. The local area goes up to New York City. Uh, Dulles is right there. Andrews is right there. Essentially, the 12th Aviation Battalion is the sister unit of. You've got the 1st Helo Squadron, which is the Air Force's version, their VIP support, and then you've got HMX 1, Marine 1, those guys down in Quantico,
Mhm.
and they're kind of all, uh, uh, you know, we're all related in different branches, but doing the same mission.
Right.
So yeah, on any given day, you're all through there in training. You go through there as well because that's what you have to kind of be. That's your bread and butter. That's what you have to be most proficient at, is flying those routes because your customers, the VIPs, are all inside of the DC area. Um, and so Pentagon's right there northwest of DCA, um, and so you've got to be prepared to pick them up from the Pentagon and take them wherever they want to go. And those routes are how you get in and out. So even on a training mission, you're flying
Huh.
those routes. So
So one of the questions somebody had was you couldn't hear the helicopter reply. and they asked, were they on VHF or UHF? Because military aircraft normally use UHF, and the
Yeah,
question, I
so
guess,
that's
is
a
they
great,
were
yeah.
VHF, right?
Yeah, so I've heard that. You and I talked about it a little bit before. I've heard that same thing where it's like, well, the helo pilots never reply. Well, on depends which frequency you're listening on. That goes back to you brought up the President Trump talking about stuff and about the ATC question. If you're going to kind of look at it holistically, so on that chart you can see it's got the control tower frequency 119.1, and then
Yeah.
below it it's got another VHF frequency 134.35. That is a helicopter only frequency that talks to tower. Um, Sometimes those controllers would be separate, meaning there's one controller that's controlling the control tower and landing and taking off airplanes at the runway, and there'd be a separate controller controlling the helo routes in that sector. Sometimes they're the same person, much like when ground and tower are the same person, um,
Right.
but they're transmitting on two different frequencies. So same controller, but you might only hear part of the conversation. If you're tuned up tower, but you're taxiing,
Mhm.
um, you might hear the controller clear somebody for takeoff, but you don't hear the reply. That's not because the reply didn't happen. It's because they're on tower and you're on ground.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well, that makes total sense. So they're using VHF, but they're on two different freaks, kind of like a PRM. So the guy's monitoring both frequencies, transmitting out on two frequencies,
yeah, similar to
talking to
that.
me as I'm
And
coming in
actually,
over
and I
there.
have, yeah, and the recordings are out there of the helo frequencies as well. So I have
Right.
heard the helo frequency. I've heard Andrew's voice on the frequency, request visual separation, um, which was again that's a very common call. You talked about that a little bit. You're
Well,
just
go
so
go
close to airplanes all the time.
yeah, go through what you see happened and how it could have happened, because that to me is the how and the why. That really is what everybody wants. How and why could this happen? And there's a lot of ways that it did. I mean, if they took off 2 minutes prior, this wouldn't have happened. All the literally, if you took Swiss cheese and you aligned all the Swiss cheese and the holes aligned, and you were able to make it through an entire pack of Swiss cheese, the final deal is an accident. And unfortunately, in this case, that's what happened. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I know guys that were flying that mission decades ago. The helo routes have existed for a long time. Obviously, airplanes have been landing DCA for a long time, and there's never
yeah,
been an issue. But I got two texts today that said, kind of what I would assume happened, or at least what I would say if I were getting the same calls at ATC gate, this is where I would be confused. I had
yeah,
two people text me today and say, "Oh, having not thought about it themselves." When I said, "Here's what I think happened," they said that exact thing happened to me on that route. One was a V-22 guy. Another one was a Black Hawk guy. But actually, at the time, it was Huey's. He would have been
oh
flying
wow,
Huey's out of there. And both of them said, "Oh, that exact same thing almost happened to me," and didn't even see him. Misidentified the aircraft, and then didn't see him until they crossed over me at 100 feet above me. Um, so I think those near misses are probably way more frequent than people would assume in that area,
right,
but you get a little confirmation bias where nothing's happened yet, and it's been decades.
yeah.
So the Swiss cheese just never lined up until 2 days ago. So
Well, we'll talk through. I mean, as a regional guy coming in and then sidestepping over to 3-3, kind of talk
yeah,
through, and then
so
as the helicopter, what the tower normally would do. That whole thing my son asked about. Hey, that guy was out holding, and then he went right into him. What is that when they're out holding? Kind
so
of
I,
go
I
through
don't
that
think
for
there
me.
was any. I don't think there actually was any holding involved. If you go back to the pictures, and we'll kind of talk through. I know you've got a couple of them that I gave you. Um, that'll help, I think, everybody kind of see what's going on. Let me start from the beginning. So they're out doing the training flight. This sounds like it was a annual proficiency eval. So
Mhm.
Andrew was given a check ride to the other pilot. That name hasn't been released at the
Yeah,
family's
don't
request, so I'm not gonna,
yeah, don't talk.
yeah, and they're flying with one crew chief, so that was pretty typical. Then I'd speculate the crew chief's probably sitting right back. That was kind of the standard way to do it, not prescribed, but kind of standard. So they go out, they do their training flight. I don't know exactly where they did it, but then as soon as I kind of saw where the crash happened, I went, "They're coming home for the night." That's Route 4 is pretty much the go home route. And so that
Right.
takes you all the way back down to Davison. Davison's just on the west side, below below where the screen is there, just on the west side of the river. And so they go out, they do a training flight. They're doing an eval, I should say. They're basically done with it, and they're coming home. They came off of Route 1. They're going on to Route 4. Again, super, very, very frequent. Traffic was kind of alternating, it sounds like, that they were landing both runway 1 and runway 33. It's not to say that runway 33, somebody kind of said, oh, it's not, it, I said, yeah, that's the infrequent one. And they said, no, it's not infrequent. I've landed there all the time on 33. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, it happens. But winds are typically out of the south. I haven't been to DC as an airline pilot that much, but winds are typically out of the south, or at least more frequently. So the south direction is more commonly used. And then when they land north, everybody can use runway 1. Not everybody can use runway 33 because of the length.
Yep.
It's only 5,200 feet long, so not everybody's going to land in there. So if they're able to, they're going to put everybody on runway 1. It just makes it simpler for the controller. Nights like 2 nights ago, where there's more traffic, then you may start sequencing people to 33, just in order to build a little bit more time between aircraft landing on each runway. And so essentially what happens is, as Pat 25 was coming south, there's ATC audio to this effect where, and I actually think the controller did somewhere between an adequate and a good job, certainly within the limits of their training. And, I was an instrument evaluator too. Instrument evaluators in the Army they kind of beat us up and try to make us like little mini ATC guys. We're not, but we are familiar with the .65, which is the air traffic control, essentially their Bible. And so we do spend a lot of time in that in order to give people accurate instrument check rides. And so the controller calls out traffic, essentially says something to the effect of, Pat 25, your traffic is a CRJ south of Wilson Bridge at 1,200 feet, landing 33. That's not way too much information. It's enough information. But at the same time, you're at 200 feet, flying down a river, close to buildings, not unusual for what they're doing. They're familiar and comfortable with it. But anytime you get low, things happen faster. And there's also, I, at least if I were in their shoes, I would be expecting them to land runway 1, because that's what you almost always see. And the entire time I was at Fort Belvoir, I don't remember ever seeing anybody land 33 when I was on Route 4. Sometimes they would hold you at Haynes Point, which is on the map just northeast. So sometimes they would just have you hold there. I never even really spent too much time thinking about why they were holding me there. It's just, hey, hold at Haynes Point, and you just do some circles. It's not instrument holding; it's just turn in circles, and you do a couple circles, and then they say, okay, clear to proceed Route 4. So then you're busy doing your circles. You're not necessarily like picking up on and watching traffic come in and land through 3. Let me see how it happens. So it's possible that they never actually have ever seen anybody land on 3-3. They've either been holding, or it's just never happened to them. And so as I'm putting myself in those shoes, I would anticipate somebody landing runway 1. So if you can show the next picture, if you're able, Taco.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do is, hopefully I did an okay job. I tried to overlay it as best I can. This is the ILS, portion of the ILS anyways, more or less the right size, overlaid onto the to Pat 25's route. Right. And so this is probably what I would be expecting them to do if I missed it's runway 33. So either I hear 33 and don't comprehend it, or maybe I don't quite hear it. If that's the case, and you just kind of follow Route 4, on Route 4, you follow the eastern shoreline. It doesn't matter what altitude you're at. You could be at 10,000 feet. You're never going to hit anybody, because the ILS takes them to the west, and they basically go straight down the river from Wilson Bridge, and then eventually they're going to end up on the west side of the river to land on runway 1. So, the two lines never meet. And so if you're anticipating that happening, you're not very concerned about it. I think it would certainly be possible to look down the bridge, to look at that and pick up the aircraft behind PSA, behind the CRJ, and misidentify that. And that aircraft could actually be landing 1. Meanwhile, you have a CRJ kind of leaking off to the east side that maybe you don't see. That would be a scenario that I could see happening to myself. just based on, again, the repetitions where I've seen a bunch of aircraft land runway 1. I haven't seen anybody land 3-3. If you go to the next picture, so this is the RNAV 3-3. It's not exactly what they were doing because I think they were circling the land 3-3.
Yeah.
But it's more or less an accurate depiction, I think, of so you can kind of imagine what they would probably be doing, especially if they've done the RNAV 3-3 before.
Yeah.
It's going to be something like this. And so essentially then now you've got pad 25. What they would have been doing is going down the east side of the river, same exact path, but now you've got a jet that's going to cross over their line twice. So once to get east of the river, and then they're going to do a big, I think it's a 49-degree turn to land runway 33. So now they're crossing over that path twice, which is an entirely different scenario.
And we were kind of talking about that too. Constant bearing, decreasing range. Sometimes it's hard to spot things right in front of you. But if he called out the traffic, they said, yeah, we got the traffic in sight. And they were zeroed in on the other one. Somebody had a question about NVGs. Would NVGs affect checking altitude indicators, other instruments in the cockpit at night? These are old steam gauges, right? In this model?
Yeah, that
model?
particular model, it's steam gauges. They also had iPads. NVGs, it sounds like that's from somebody that hasn't flown with night vision goggles before. When you're flying with night vision, you actually look under your night vision. It does beg another question, which is, did they have their night vision down at the time?
Yeah.
So they almost certainly, it's an evaluation. They're almost certainly doing a night vision goggles standardization evaluation. So they've got night vision, almost certainly.
Yeah, but isn't that really hard with all the lights in DC? I mean,
Yeah.
is there a certain point down the river that normally you would transition back and put the nods down?
Yeah, so there's not a prescribed spot. There's not like at this point you're going to go night unaided. There's no requirement to go night unaided, and so that's kind of left up to the individual pilot and the individual crew and the pilot in command when they're going to do that. And there's certainly times where, because of the side of the aircraft you're on and the lighting is different west and east, where one pilot might have them down, one pilot might have them up. Same thing for the crew chief, and you're not always aware what the crew chief is doing in the back. But there's certainly where it is too bright and you're just not really able to keep your night vision down. To answer the question about the instruments real quick, if you're not used to flying night vision or you've never really seen how they do it, we fly with our night vision down, but there's no, ground operating night vision. Sometimes there's a cup that kind of sucks your eyeball. So it makes it so that the enemy can't see the rest of the night vision around the sides. Aviation night vision doesn't have that. And the reason why it doesn't have that is because then you can observe your instruments by looking under them. So you keep your head in the same position, you keep your night vision out of the aircraft, looking outside, and then you just glance down below your night vision goggles to see the instruments.
Okay.
So it's a skill set you kind of have to acquire. Way back in the day, they actually would fly with one. They'd fly with one so that it was adjusted for inside the cockpit and one adjusted outside the cockpit.
Oh God.
Yeah, but it caused a lot of headaches and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, Ivan asked that about the NVGs. Reported that the Gold Blackhawk chopper was an annual proficiency flight, had NVGs when the bright lights of the city and jets blind the pilots using the NVGs. So that could be a factor as well, a huge one.
Yeah, it could be a factor. I think again, kind of given this scenario, I think that it's possible that they misidentified the aircraft and never even saw the CRJ. I also think that it's possible that they saw the CRJ, but just, again, if I'm putting myself, if I was in that aircraft and I was a little confused, which I kind of would be, given that I've never seen anybody land 3-3 before and I'm not familiar with the RNAV because it's not my airfield, that it's certainly possible that I would see them and I would be like, hold on, why are they going across the river? And also, because I'm wearing night vision, it's kind of hard to judge distances sometimes with night vision. It's a bright light that's getting a little bit brighter, a little bit dimmer, if it's coming straight at you or generally straight at you. So it could be really hard to perceive the depth, the distance from that. So now I've got an aircraft that's crossing from right to left over my nose when I thought it was going to stay on the right side of my aircraft. And it's doing it slowly until it's not, because at some point the airplane's going to turn hard left. They're going to do kind of their base turn. to land
Yeah.
3-3. But if I'm not anticipating that now I've got bigger problems. And you can kind of see where the accident happened is where the second arrow coming down intersects the line.
Right.
Um, and that is not a lot of time. That visual descent point there is only 1.4 miles away. Again, they were doing a circle to land. That's about the same that they would have been doing. 1.4 miles happens pretty quick, and if you're at 200 feet in a helicopter, you don't have a lot of places to go.
Yeah. Chris asked about why there was only one crew chief aboard. Is that standard operating procedure normally to have one guy
Yeah,
or
so
crew?
interestingly, army wide, it's that's pretty standard that you would only have one crew chief unless you're flying multi-ship. So if you're flying multi-ship, then it might be required to have two crew chiefs. I was an instructor pilot at Fort Rucker. According to the operator's manual, the minimum crew requirement for a Black Hawk is two pilots.
Wow.
There's no crew chief requirement, and so at Fort Rucker with students on board, we'd go out and fly an instructor and a student with nobody in the back providing airspace surveillance, and that was common because the Dash 10 says you're allowed to, and the SOP there doesn't change it. So if anything, the SOP kind of army wide and again, I don't want to go into too much detail about that particular unit, but generally the SOP army wide is actually more restricted than the operator's manual.
Okay. And so he also asked another question. The helo increased altitude to 300. I don't know that that is a solid number. I want to say it might have been
I've, s-
350 from what I've
so,
seen.
yeah, so I've seen 300 and 350 on a couple different instrumentations. I would hesitate to speculate why they were at that altitude or if they were even necessarily at that altitude. You're talking about ADS-B or radar returns that could have been happening after the crash. The radar returns that I've seen appear to be very slow, and I think they've been slowed down so that you can kind of get a better idea of what's going on.
Hmm.
It appears to me that that happened pretty fast within a few seconds. Um, that they got up to 300 feet. That would be pure speculation. Maybe they started a slow climb trying to get over the airplane. Maybe that was data that was coming after the accident. Um, I think there's a lot of instances where that would be understandable. The other thing is, we're not perfect. I can't say that I've strictly as much as I've flown on there. If you put a couple hundred hours into flying on those routes, I can't say that I've been exactly on altitude every single time.
Yeah. All right. Something else came up. ADS-B, TCAS, stuff like that. Would do those aircraft have TCAS? And for those that don't know, TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system, we have a system that if two aircraft are coming at each other, the transponders are communicating, and it'll tell one to climb and one to descend, and then stop and level out. Does the military do you have that in yours, especially around there, or is that too just Army
Yeah,
doesn't
I
have it?
don't. There's no Army aircraft, at least as far as I'm aware of, and at least on the rotary wing side that have
Mhm.
them that I'm aware of. I know, particularly those aircraft don't have them. Yeah, again, I don't think that there are any in the Army, especially on the rotary wing side. It's possible, um, but well, I will take it back. Some of them were fielded, but I don't think that there was like an approved. It's called an AWR, but I don't think there was an AWR for actually their use.
Yeah,
So there are aircraft out there that have TCAS on them, um, but it wasn't an approved system to use. So, and there'd be reasons
and
why certain units in the military you would or would not use it as well.
yeah, somebody said, well, they wouldn't have the transponder on because they're used to flying formation close, whatever. I'm thinking, no, we used to fly six C-130s. The lead guy's got his on. We're all in standby. So they see this big
Yeah,
blob on the radar, but they've
yeah.
just seen one guy.
If you're flying if you're flying multi ship, typically you'd only have one person squawking.
Yeah.
Everybody else would be in standby. Um,
So
that
we can,
again, I don't want to get into the particulars of that unit because of their mission set.
yeah,
Um, but in
understand.
this case, it's single ship, so it's not something that would they were certainly squawking. Obviously, they're picking up on radar. If you've seen any of the videos of the radar, their call sign is on there.
Yeah.
So obviously, they are using their transponder.
Oh, horrific. And the other thing that in my mind, doing a sidestep and coming around to land on 3-3, they're going to be in a left bank. trying to do that visual coming around, because the guy's sitting there watching it and he's flying it and he's constantly in and out, looking at airspeed, VSI, altitude, looking at the end of the runway and driving it right towards the end of the runway. Those airplanes, the reason the smaller RJs land on the shorter runway, their ref speed is a lot slower than a 737. 737 or, I don't know what Airbus, but 737, you could become smoking in at 150 knots, which is it's fast. The Airbus a little bit slower. A 757, believe it or not, like 118 knots. Crazy. But those guys coming in, I guarantee you, the airliner on profile coming around, and he's looking at the end of the runway and doing these little quick cross checks on his instruments. Probably not even looking out here. And even if they were at an angle coming here, they didn't hear the helicopter. I don't recall the tower giving the airliner, hey, you got traffic coming down the river at 10 o'clock. I don't recall hearing that. Did you?
I don't recall hearing that either. Again, it could be out there. It could have been that they did, and I just haven't heard, a long enough clip of the audio.
Yeah.
Once the helicopter requests visual separation, I'm not 100% sure if they're required at that point to even make the other aircraft aware, because, and especially given that scenario where the helicopter's down low,
Yeah.
it's generally easier to see airplanes making their approach because you're looking up. It's very difficult, even if that aircraft's flying straight and level. It would be more difficult for them to pick up the helicopter. Again, you're in city lights, you're right on the shoreline, you're 200 feet or thereabouts. And then add into it, as you just brought up and as we talked about earlier, they've got this big bank end to land 3-3, to circle to land 3-3. And
Yeah.
so the chances are that for most of that that kind of final approach segment that they're about to get onto, the helicopter is on the other side of their fuselage from their eyeballs. And so they just physically couldn't see it, even if they knew exactly where it was. They'd be looking
Yeah.
essentially through their feet to see that helicopter. And so it's asking a lot of the CRJ crew, from all I've seen. And important to point out too, Sam Lilly, the FO, his dad Tim, I think he was a Black Hawk pilot as well. I don't know Tim, but I do know that he was the chief warrant officer for. I think he was a Black Hawk pilot too. I know that he's also around with RTAG. So heart goes out to him and his family, everybody involved. And it seems like Sam was following in his dad's footsteps. And this, it just, to me, looks like the CRJ was doing exactly what they were cleared to do. They probably just couldn't see, the pat traffic, even if they would have called the traffic out. It's common when one aircraft can see another. This we're flying
Yeah.
up in the flight levels. Sometimes where one aircraft calls the other one out, and then a period of time goes by and the other aircraft never sees the other one.
Yeah.
And then
I
sometimes
got him.
ATC, once they've said, hey, I have him in sight, okay, maintain visual separation. Like you said, ATC kind of goes, okay, well, that's one less thing I don't have to worry about.
Right.
So then maybe they wouldn't have called it. I don't know that they're required to. That's going to come out in the investigation, I'm sure, whether or not they were required to.
But when you're flying NVGs, I flew NVGs in a Herc out Yuma and stuff like that. When you were flying with yours, a little bit different style and stuff, would you get a blind spot at all? I mean, could they have gotten into a blind spot somewhere within the cockpit with the NVGs on, or
Yeah,
one
well,
person?
so the NVG field of view, and we can talk a little bit more specifically about the type of NVGs that they were using and what that might have caused. But kind of no matter which type of NVGs that they were using, green phosphor or white,
Mhm.
they were almost certainly using white, by the way. It's only a 40-degree field of view. So blind spot is relative. You're blind outside in terms of night vision, you're blind outside of 40 degrees. So if you're looking straight ahead, but that CRJ is 41 degrees outside, well, now
Yeah.
you're relying on your night vision to see it, your unaided night vision,
Yeah.
and so certainly possible. There's a lot of I would say there's a lot of hearty argument in the community about just in general about what type of vision you're using, whether it's
Mhm.
scotopic or mesopic, or it doesn't really matter. It's super in the weeds. But I
Right.
think it is harder. It is certainly harder if you are focused on your night vision and you're looking through and you're using your photopic vision. I think it is certainly harder as you're staring straight ahead with photons going in your eyeballs to now pick something out of a dark sky, even a light like that. So
And constantly
yeah,
cross-checking your instruments, which if whoever was flying pulled up just a little, it only takes a half a heartbeat to jump 100 feet in
yeah, it
altitude.
happens fast. I did a Fox News interview that was pretty quick. She didn't ask a lot, but one of the questions she did ask is like, how long does that take? How long would it take you? It happened fast. The Lima model that they were flying is steam gauges. It doesn't have an autopilot. It's got a flight path stabilization, so it does have automatic flight control system and a flight path stabilization system that does kind of try to hold them at their altitude. But the system is using, um, accelerometers and all kinds of other stuff. It doesn't actually know what that altitude is, and so it's basically holding your altitude because it's more or less holding your attitude, which holds your altitude in a
Mhm.
helicopter. Um, but it doesn't actually know what the number is. So if you get off, it isn't going to fix it. Versus the Mike model, which has a 4-axis autopilot, but only a third of the aircraft at Fort Belvoir have that. So you've got a 4-axis autopilot. You can kind of pick and choose. In the airlines, it's certainly less frequent that we would be like, well, I'm going to couple to altitude, but not airspeed, or I'm going to couple to altitude and airspeed, but not my flight path, right?
Right.
That's not something that you would do in the airlines, but in a Mike model Black Hawk, you would because the helicopter routes are there's a lot of turning on them, and there's
Yeah.
places where it's like, well, we don't want to fly over this dock, and so you're kind of trying to avoid stuff a lot. You're trying to more or less stay on route, but the route's not straight lines, right? You saw the map.
Yeah.
And so in a Mike model, what you would do is you would generally couple to altitude and airspeed. So now I can kind of relieve my mind of that burden. Um, and I'm just going to kind of guard the controls. If I need to go avoid something left or right, I'll do that. But I've got the airspeed dialed up to 80 knots or 90 or 100. And then I've got the altitude at 200. And then as I'm going to those different altitudes, I dial in that altitude. And it just relieves me to have better airspace surveillance, to understand more of what's going on. I've only got so many mice running around in my head, to power this
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that frees you up to kind of perceive better what else is going on. And in this case, they were flying the older model Black Hawk with a iPad strapped to their leg. Um, and
And you
that's
guys
that's
don't
a lot to
use,
monitor.
yeah, you guys don't use JEPs. You use DoD or
Yeah, they're DoD plates.
DoD
Well,
plates.
we don't use JEPs. There are DoD and there's FAA plates that we'll use, but we don't use JEPs. That's true.
Okay. And trying to look down, imagine you're driving in your car and you've got your Waze, but you got your Waze strapped to your thigh, and you're constantly looking down trying to watch the car speed in front of you and brake and all that. That just that second is enough to miss something, And then we always talk about, there's a medical term called stachoma. The mind sees what it wants to see. So if you tell me that there's a jet over there and I'm looking, I focus and pick up on what I assume is the target. I've got it. That's it. When in fact, it's probably over here.
Yeah.
Somebody,
Yeah, it happens fast. And again, if you're focused on the wrong aircraft landing one, it's easy to kind of have that confirmation bias, and you're laser focused on them. I'm flying down the river. I'm kind of worried about where I'm flying, and I'm worried about the airplane that I think it should be.
yeah,
Again, me putting myself in a situation like that, not to say that that's what happened here. I could see it being really easy for myself to lose track of another aircraft that I don't even think is over there, that I have no real reason to be scanning for. And as they're getting lower, they're getting closer to the lights to begin with. It's outside of my night vision goggle field of view. So unless you have a real good scan and cross check, which it would be nice if you always did, but we're not perfect.
right.
Um, and so unless you're really maintaining airspace surveillance well, the crew chief's probably on the right seat. So there's no crew chief on that side to see him leaking out in a random aircraft kind of leaking in the wrong direction when you don't expect it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they do this big turn and you're looking at their belly. So now you're not necessarily seeing landing lights right away. Um, yeah, it's a bad situation.
It
Um,
is. Joe
and again,
Harrison asked.
assuming that that's the situation. So
Yeah, Joe asked, is there noise restrictions in DC that prohibited training between midnight and 6 a.m. when DCA is closed? The the noise restrictions are for takeoff, Joe, takeoff and landing out of DCA. I don't think that has anything to do with flying down along the river at
it
all.
doesn't have anything to do with the helicopter routes. The helicopters There are quiet hours going into at Davis and Army Airfield. Those are public knowledge, but they allow you to get in there and take off. What they don't allow you to do is continue to do traffic patterns at a certain point.
Right.
So you can still fly the helicopter routes. You could still go out and do an eval and then come home for the night. That would be not a problem at all. And DCA is irrelevant. DCA, as far as the Army helicopters are concerned, they can close and open whenever they want to. We can do whatever we want on the helicopter routes.
Well, Rob's got this. Most of the time, ref speed on a 700 would be about 135 knots, somewhere around 143 miles an hour, or something like that. They don't have auto throttle either, so the crew is busy. Yes. Rob, you're on
Yeah.
here. Let's ask this. This question came up as well. What limitation do you guys have where they cancel the alerts for any RAs, anything like that? So they may not be. I mean, their transponders on. They may not have ADSB on, but at least the RJ could see a symbol moving towards them, but they're not going to get the traffic, descend, climb. Do you know, Rob, what the cutoff is for that? And if you got your manual, look that up. I'd be interested in that myself. Steve Locke, great man. Great discussion, guys. Nice to hear from someone who really understands the situation as
Thanks,
opposed to
Steve.
the clowns on media. Yes, you know what? I've listened to General so and he gets on talking about it, and so gets on talking about it, and I've seen some videos of the accident where they take the preliminary data. But the bottom line is, we'll never know the human factors because the helicopter doesn't have a black box, as I understand. Right?
It actually does, and it's been recovered. So I think I said that initially. This is kind of into the weeds, but essentially there's two different systems that can record cockpit audio.
Yeah.
So much like an airliner where you've got an actual microphone there for the CVR, the Mike model has that. The Lima models, some of them I think have that, but all of them
Okay.
have in their IV hums, which is their health monitoring system. They're able to record that. So that was an update later on. So the more up to date IV hums, that would be able to record audio. So it's likely that they'll get that from the Blackhawk.
Okay.
Yeah. So whether or not that'll be released or when that gets released to the public, it'll certainly come out in the NTSB report, at least in part. But
Okay, so Billy talks about the way the Route 4 is designed. If the helicopter's hugging the eastern shoreline and 200 feet and below, there should be no possibility of being in the flight path of an aircraft on final on 3-3. I think that would be right.
He did the Rod Burgundy there, where it seems like it's a statement, but then there's a question mark. So it's I'm Rod Burgundy. So I'm going to assume that that's a question.
He's
we covered it a little bit.
He's an MV-22 pilot. Marine.
Yeah, we covered it. We covered it a little bit. If you go back to I don't know, Taco, if you can go back to that picture of the RNAV 33.
Yeah.
Where actually, if they're hugging the eastern shoreline and they're circling the land 33 from runway 1, they actually cross over the helicopter's path twice. And one of those points, they are inside of 1.4 miles. Go to the that last picture, the one that's got the RNAV 33 on there, the one that you were just on.
Okay. Coming by.
We'll get there. Not right that one.
There.
That one right there. Yeah, so the yellow path would be the path that the helicopters would be taking, hugging the eastern shore. But if they're doing the RNAV 33, or if they're circling the land, which would kind of probably present about the same way, they actually are going to probably cross over onto the eastern shoreline. So the helicopter's staying over the water. The jet would have crossed over onto the eastern shoreline and then would have cut back across the water to land on the western side. So even though it's a little counterintuitive, in this case, I think it's likely the jet would have crossed their path, essentially twice. The altitude further down the river, because the airplane would have been higher, 200, 300, 400 feet wouldn't have been an issue. So the southern place where they would cross, not as big of a deal. But where they cross right there at 3-3, like I said, that visual sim point for the RNAV is 1.4 miles. So that's really close, and you're going to be close to 300, 400 feet probably at that point where they would have crossed paths. So if the helicopter's off a little bit for whatever reason, or tries to dodge, when they go up when they should have held their altitude because they perceive the aircraft, or there's a million different reasons why they might have been off on altitude legitimately. And there's a lot of reasons why I could see myself being off on altitude because I'm just not perfect. I like, 99% of the time I am, but not 1% of the time, distracted or whatever. There's other stuff going on. I'm confused about why that aircraft's turning. I get off just a little bit. It can happen. And they do cross the path twice. So
Right.
I hope that answered Billy's question.
Yeah, that was Billy. Billy, they earlier. I don't know if you were on, but we had he had a HMX-1 guy flying back down one of the helo route there, and looked up, and an airplane was 150 feet above him, over him. They flew underneath it, never saw it until it went over them. So
yeah, it was the exact same scenario. My friend texted me this morning, and I said, "Here's what I think happened." And he was like, "Oh my gosh, that exact same thing happened to me. Missed me by 100 feet. Didn't even see him until they crossed over top of me.
Right.
Just called the wrong traffic." So again, put myself in that situation where I would think, "Hey, this is where I might be confused." That's been kind of confirmed by two different people. Another one being a Huey guy. So.
Yeah, one channel made a point that the TCAS is muted at a certain point. It's kind of like our weather radar. We have reactive wind shear and we have predictive wind shear and different things. And the alerts at a certain level will shut off so that you're not overwhelmed. Now, from the pilot aspect, coming into land, I'm sure that the TCAS was muted. And somebody said,
yeah, it's inhibited. I know in the Blackhawk or in the Airbus, I'm sure, in the Boeing too. And my understanding in the CRJ is 500 feet. Yeah, there's Robert. He just said 500.
Yeah, well, he said it's been a few
TAs
years.
below
I think
500.
RAs, below 1,000. Can't remember if TAs are inhibited below 500. So don't take our word for it, folks. But that's probably a good guess because a lot of that stuff is standard.
And also, even if it's not, but that the traffic's out there, but they've requested visual separation, I could see a case where you would, for a TA at least, where you would continue anyway, saying, but they've already said they're gonna, see and avoid. They're gonna avoid us. I don't see them, but they said they saw me.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily the case, but could be where you would ignore a TA or disregard it. So
Ivan wrote, is this a case where the jet was a bit too low, below 490, and the chopper was a bit too high, above 200? No time to see each other, chopper below jet. Ivan, looking at the data and knowing that having flown into DCA a million times at night, doing the river visual from the north hidden south, and you come around, and when you come around, you're cranking the airplane, and you're sitting there flying. I'm blessed because I have a HUD, so I'm able to look through the HUD, see the airport, look through the HUD, and follow the guidance. Where the FO has to fly the guidance from the RNAV approach, and he's using crosshairs that basically elevation and course. So he's having to constantly cross check himself, and I'm able to use the HUD. So I don't even know where I was going with that. Yes, it's
is it possible that the airplane was low and the helicopter's high? I think it's impossible at this point to say it's not possible.
Yeah,
I think and define low too. If you're going to say, is it possible that the airplane was low? Well, low. Is it possible that they were low outside of the standard, just doing whatever? Yeah, it's possible. It doesn't seem like that's likely to me. It seems like, as you were describing, Taco, where you've got the benefit of a HUD and a CRJ, no, and an Airbus, no. And so you're busy in this big turn. That's a bigger turn than for the river visual.
Oh yeah,
which the river visual is significant. And so now you're in a less kind of capable aircraft for doing that. You've got a fairly junior FO. He's trying to fly. He's looking outside, and at some point it's time to do some pilot stuff. The first time I came into DCA, this is I don't want to tell on the guy. I don't know. I can't even remember his name. Former Air Force guy. And so it's my first time flying a jet into DCA. We're flying the river visual. And I honestly don't know why I did this. This was the third day of our trip. And I said ahead of time, hey, I haven't flown into DCA before. I've flown in a ton in a helicopter, not into DCA, but in the area. So I'm really familiar with the area, but I've never flown a jet in DCA. And he goes, I want you to take this like that's how much respect I have for warrant officers. Which honestly, I was like, I mean, Okay. Like, I appreciate that he had that much confidence in warrant officers.
Yeah.
Hopefully that means I did okay the first 2 days. But ask me how far off on my glide path I was.
How were you?
I don't know. I was looking at the runway. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's at some point, I'm a pilot. I've got to look at the runway and land, and you've got to kind of task stack a little bit and say, hey, at this point, I know I'm in a safe position to land, right? I can
Yeah.
look at the PAPIs. I can do some other stuff. So I've kind of disregarded that particular piece of information because I had the PAPIs available, and I'm flying the airplane, and it was a big crosswind actually at the time, which is common down there as well. So at some point at 2, 3, 4, 500 feet, you're not going to be looking. I'm not staring at my instruments anymore. Autopilot's off. I'm flying the airplane.
Yeah.
So is it possible that they were? I would assume that they've got same aspects that we do at every airline. The two airlines I've been at have half dot. So is it possible that they were below a half dot? It's possible. I would definitely not speculate that they were.
Yeah, but that's if the
Um,
guidance goes all the way to the end of the runway. It's not a precision
yeah,
approach. And does
yeah,
the
that's
art
right.
have
And
guidance
and they're
go to
circling.
the end
They're
of the runway?
circling to land. That's another good point. They're circling to land, so they're not even queued up for it.
No, you don't
So their
have
glide path's kind
anything.
of irrelevant. They're at best they're looking at PAPIs, and not only that, if you factor into it, what I would say, um, also entirely likely or possible, 5,200-foot long runway. You're coming into a short runway. You're doing a big turn to get there. I've asked a lot of friends at the airlines today and yesterday, hey, what do we all do when we know the runway's short?
Mhm.
We all undershoot. We all shoot for the shortest possible approach. Go to 3 reds. Um, you call it out. So now I'm low, but I'm within standard. I'm stable. I'm not doing anything dangerous.
Did you see this?
And so
Another airplane crashed in Philly. I don't Dave, I just saw that, when I got home this evening. A plane crashed into a mall in Philly. They always come in threes is what they say, so,
yeah, I
um,
heard I saw that right before we got on. It looks like it's a private,
private jet
um,
or
small.
private
Well, not
plane,
even a jet,
something.
but yeah, it seems like it's a smaller aircraft. But certainly, I don't have any insights whatsoever on that. That happened right before we got on. So
Well, thanks, Ivan. We got
thanks,
that.
Ivan.
And then Jason wrote, "I've flown the R700 33 a few times long ago. I can see how easy it is to get short field syndrome, where the smaller, shorter runway makes you feel like you're too high visually. It can trick you
Yeah,
into ducking under. Yeah, visual 33 at night would make that scenario kind of likely. Not saying that's what the crew did. Well, they do have VASIs, right? So they've got a lighting system to be able to give them a glide path down to the touchdown.
yeah. But
So
again, it would be too easy to do to say, hey, I'm gonna try to make this approach as short as possible because it's a short runway.
yeah,
Um, So I can see how that would potentially happen, but I can also see where that would happen, but they're still within standard.
yeah.
So I don't see any reason right now to say like, oh, I see clearly the CRJ was low. As far as I'm concerned, all the information's pointing to the CRJ was doing what they would normally do.
Yeah. You know what? Let's just say that this is one of those horrific accidents that
Yeah,
from time to time happen. And 2009, I heard, was the last major catastrophe. So if you look at the odds, frankly, folks, you've got a better chance of being kicked in the head by a donkey and killed than you do dying in an airplane accident or even being involved in one. Um, but I'll tell you this: everybody out there listening, if you want to know what flying was like 80 years ago, there was a book. They made a movie, but it had nothing to do with the book. Really, it didn't. Called "Fate is the Hunter" by Ernie Gantz. So if you read "Fate is the Hunter," oh, you got it up there.
yeah. I can thank my friend Floyd Stevens for suggesting I read this book. So I read that when I was first coming to the airlines.
Yeah, I've got Ernie Gantz, Flying Circus, Fate is the Hunter. I've got all those up there on my shelf as well. That book basically, when we talk about had that helicopter crew been delayed a minute or 2
5
minutes,
seconds. If they were going 74 knots instead of 78 knots,
yeah,
or 100
just
knots instead of 80.
so many things in life that put them together at that point. We'll never know. God doesn't disclose why, but it happens. And in this case, it's a horrific accident, and that's all it is, guys. Um, Not intentional. I've heard so many weird, dumb things, right? Not intentional. It's a human factors problem. It is an accident, okay? So when you go back and review this, just remember what I said. Most of the time, it's a human factors issue, a problem with the crew. Other times, you have an engine fall off, and they have nothing outside of their control. But
Well, and this
that's
is certainly one of those times where I was the equivalent of CRM instructor in the Army. Um, all the instructor pilots are to some extent, but this is one of those where if the Army crew did anything wrong, all of the stuff that I'm looking at, where it's like maybe this happened or maybe they did that, and it's pure speculation.
yeah.
In any of those scenarios, I would say, and I could have done the same exact thing.
There, but for the grace of God, walk thee, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So once again, prayers go out for. I got a message from an Army buddy who still has a lot of friends up there in the crash rescue, fire rescue area in the area, and he said it's murky, so it's black, pitch black down there in the working conditions on the river, and as they're handling teenagers, just such a horrible. I can't imagine being the recovery folks. That's very traumatic, and it also brings back.
Yeah, pray for
Yeah.
them for sure.
Yeah, it brings back memories of when I was a teenager up there in Arlington. We had a horrific snowstorm in, what was that, 82, and Air Florida didn't get de-iced and didn't have the power up full, and they took off and went right into the Potomac River. Um, that that was another one that was right at rush hour. I mean, it's just all the things that put together to make that happen is just
Yeah.
horrific.
Yeah, hopefully,
Yeah,
if anybody's listening on here, there's a lot of speculation stuff out there where I think people just don't have all of the right information. They just don't have the right experiences. You could
yeah,
be a 10,000-hour airline pilot, but this is going to be outside of your realm of experience. You got to have too many other stuff going on. So if everybody could, that's again why I went on, accepted the invitation of Fox News, why I came here. Put out there, just if try to put those fires out and just say, hey, listen, this sounds like it's just everybody got unlucky, and it happens extremely rarely. But this was just one of those Swiss cheese situations where, I've been 100 feet off there before, where I'm looking over at my brand new co-pilot, and I'm like, "Hey, man, what's the altitude on this route before?" And it's 5 seconds, and they go, "Oh crap!" And they come back down again, and it happens fast. I've 100%
yeah,
been there. Air traffic
yeah.
control. Somebody asked before, also. I think I saw where in the
Oh
comments
yeah,
somebody
would air
asked, "Do
traffic
they not call
control
you
ping
out?"
them? Yeah,
No, not if it happens that fast, not in the amount of time. It's just like anything else. If you get 200 feet off when you're in the flight levels, are they going to tell you right away?
yeah,
At some point they're going to tell you. But that aircraft, especially when you're down that low, you get off by 100 feet, 50 feet, 150 feet, and it happens that fast. Remember, they requested visual separation, so now that air traffic controller that's controlling the runways and they're controlling the helo routes, they just
right.
went, not my problem, somebody else's problem now, and they've got it. And they've, decades have gone by, nobody's hit an airplane yet. So that's something they're really not that worried about, I'm sure.
Well,
And
I
so
saw
they're
that
not
they
staring
closed.
at the radar at Pat 25's, image and going, oh, look, they're 150 feet off.
Yeah, that's true. That's true because I mean they've got the next helicopter behind them. They've got these guys coming to land over at HMX-1 over at what is that, Anacostia? The
Mhm.
hangars right over there.
Yeah.
They've got park police helicopters flying around. They've got
Which is
there's
another
more
thing.
helicopter traffic.
Anacostia is right there. If you want to talk about how do you avoid the airplane, well, you're on a route. Anacostia, from the helicopter's perspective, would be a left turn. That takes them off route over Anacostia. There's nothing good over there for a helicopter to go find.
Yeah,
So you would hesitate to make a left turn there for sure. You're going to hesitate to go down. You don't want to go up because you think you're at your max altitude already. You might already
right.
be over it. You're not want to go up. So where do you go? It's just there's no good answers.
Yeah, especially at
I know that
nighttime too, because I mean you're
at
not
night, yeah.
even with NVGs on
Yeah,
discern
and
the.
they're probably using white phosphor NVGs, which means that they pick up even more light. So if you happen to see the airplane, you look at it, that you're not going to see anything except for a bright light, probably.
Right.
They're going to totally wash your NVGs out. Your NVGs are going to dim down. They've got protections on them and stuff, but those white phosphor NVGs, they're really good in the dark. They're really bad when there's any other lights.
Yeah. So I think we've covered that. That was an issue. Was NVGs? Were they on it? We don't know, but most likely they probably would be if it was a proficiency training flight, right?
Yeah.
We talked about the constant bearing, direction, speed, different things, timing. If the timing was off or it was outside of the 40 degrees of the NVGs. We talked about the altitude. That is a mistake. I think that's about it that I've heard. The crazy stuff, the circling. You explain that, why they circle sometimes. Tower has them hold somewhere so that traffic can clear, and then they'll let them go. What other weird things have I heard? I don't even want to say this about the co-pilot. Video floating around of somebody that was on Michael. What's that guy's name?
Yeah, I
Smith
know there's
Carriage.
there's a lot of dark web kind of stuff going around. I wanted to
Yeah,
spell that too. That's worth saying as well. So the name and identity of that pilot's been withheld at the family's request. Um, I did not know that pilot, but I do know people that knew the other pilot and flew with them. Sounds like an amazing person, good officer. Um, piloted within what you would expect them to pilot at their hour level.
yeah.
Um, new pilot in command. It sounds like there was nothing really to write home about in terms of that would again lead you to believe this was the case. The crew chief, same story. Everything I've gotten back about the crew chief is amazing crew chief, give you the shirt off his back, cared about his soldiers, cared about his job. Somebody pointed out that he actually had kind of like corrected or said, "Hey, are we really going to do this?" To I think a CW5 was the one that was telling me that, if I remember right. It had a couple of people in this chat because I asked about him and said, "Hey, are we really going to do this?" And basically was just saying, "I don't think this is a good idea." And he's like, most young crew chiefs are not going to tell a CW5 like, "Are we really going to do this?" And he goes, and
Yeah.
so good on him. Like he was not just going to let you make a bad risk decision. And he said, "You know what? Actually, let's not." So that crew was a top-notch crew. They
Yeah.
just ran out of luck.
Yeah, that was sad. Billy, was it low loom? I can't tell you.
There's no such thing as low in them there. You
I
could
was
have
gonna s
0%, you could have zero starlight and zero moon, but because of the cultural lighting there, it's essentially 100% illume. It feels like
yeah,
200% illume there.
I bet.
So
I bet everything's lit
yeah,
up. You're right in
yeah.
that area.
That's what I
You
was
got
saying earlier on, that you might be going up and down with your night vision there. You may just leave them up in that period. You might have them down. It just kind of depends on the pilot because the illume is always so bright in that area.
right. Hey, I heard that they shut down all the helicopter routes? Is it all of them, or just did you hear that too? The
Yeah, no, it
helicopter
sounds
routes
like it's
past
sounds like
BTA.
it's yeah, it sounds like Wilson Bridge. You can do stuff that's south of Wilson Bridge. Um, Sector 1, which is kind of the northeast of the of DCA, that's shut down. So they've shut down the parts of it that are kind of closest to the accident.
Yeah.
Um, that would be that would be a response probably because the recovery efforts going on there as much as
Ah,
anything else.
yeah. Yeah.
I would assume. But also, it would be I would say that would be a good first start of like, hey, let's just say let's not use these parts of the routes right now until we can grasp why this happened and an
Yeah, I
effort to
think,
prevent it.
as we come in on the Vernon visual, and I wish I had my iPad with me. You come around Mount Vernon and you basically fly along the river, um, and then at a certain point you can back it up with the ILS, but you go over the
Yeah.
bridge at what, 1,600 feet, something like that. So
Yeah. Something like
it's
that.
mandatory crossing point. So that's helicopters down below you, no factor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep. So, like I said, they cross over the path twice, doing that RNF 33. But the first cross that they do over the path, the helicopter's way low. The airplane's still up there above 1,000 feet. Kind of a non-issue. It's the second crossing of the path. But the first crossing of the path might be enough to throw the aircrew off if they pick up the right traffic. And as we've
right.
said, I could see myself maybe picking up and being confused, or not picking it up at all and looking at the wrong aircraft.
Well, I want to reiterate what Austin said. You won't know anything. It'll be all speculation on CNN because they got to fill, and Fox and everybody else, they've got to fill that time gap with something. And That's what they'll do. They'll sit there and fill it with a bunch of what, I think, and it's horrible. So you
Well, they're
heard
going
it
to fill it with a
here.
lot of even stupider stuff like, and this is what really makes me angry. Stupider stuff like, and you have to ask the question. It begs the question. Were the Chinese involved? Dumb stuff like that. That to tell me I'm wrong.
No, no, you're absolutely right. All
What
sorts of
I heard
insane
somebody
stuff
ask
will
was
come out.
it begs the question: is it possible to take over a Black Hawk and fly it from outside of the aircraft? No, it's not possible.
Yeah.
Um,
and we're all sitting there watching it. It drives you nuts.
yeah.
But the bottom line is the report will come out when NTSB, which does a fantastic job. Those guys are so well trained. They could tell who's on the controls because when the airplane crashes, one pilot has, like, for example, their feet flat. The other pilot with the feet on the rudders, their shins are shattered from the impact, and so they can tell who was flying the aircraft. I mean,
Well,
they
they'll
can
be
do
able to tell in
all
a
sorts
Black
of
Hawk
stuff.
because there's micro switches on the pedals, so they'll know who had their feet on the pedals if anybody did. So
Oh, well, if you guys have any other questions real quick before we shut this off, because it's been a gracious hour and 12 minutes here with Austin. I spent a lot of time flying around that area at night when the tower calls out traffic. It is tough to find in all the city lights. You're
yeah,
absolutely right. So you've got stuff blinking on the ground. You have red lights blinking on towers and on top of buildings. So
it's a needle and a stack of needles.
it really gets difficult. I heard a lot of guys in chat talking about that. Just reinforces I'm not going to take a visual anymore. Well, you've got to land somewhere and sometime. So have to do some of that pilot stuff.
Mhm.
Anyway, dude, I can't thank you enough for coming in here and talking about this.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Taco. I'm glad we talked this morning. I'm glad you invited me. Hopefully, we can dispel a lot of the myths and rumors out there.
Yeah, yeah. And if anybody has any other questions, post them up here, and then I think we'll be able to address them later, and we could go answer some stuff. Hey, I know this guy right here. He's another medevac. Thank you for your sanity through this horrible situation. Amen. Thanks,
Thanks.
brother. And been amazed at the amount of BS coming from the aviation experts. Commentaries, clearly, many of them
Yeah.
don't know what they're talking about. You know what? I can sit there and give you my analysis, but like Austin said, it doesn't matter what I think. My experience level is not what they experienced for years. I mean, how many times could you do that route with your eyes closed? I mean,
A
maybe not
lot.
with your
Yeah.
eyes closed, but you know what I mean. Like
Close
the back
to.
of your
Yeah.
hand. You've done it. You've done it a million times.
Yeah.
And see, let's see. Howdy Taco guest Austin. Don't know much about NVG's visibility, whiteout, etc. What type of transponder do they have? No TCAS or something similar, I'm sure. We kind of addressed this earlier. They do have transponders. They don't have TCAS. So I think
Yeah,
we
and
addressed
you can
that.
see at the very least they were. I'm not going to get into Mode S or ADSB for them. At the very least, it's obvious at this point, looking at the radar, that they're using Mode C. So I just can't talk about the specifics of that unit and what. Yeah,
Gotcha.
what? Yeah,
Well, Scott, thank you very much. This was nice. Great discussion. Well done, Bravo Zulu. And tell you what, I think we're getting down to the end. Outstanding information, tragic situation. Yeah, it's so horrible. Ivan came in late, but halfway through. Sorry if I asked questions about anything. No, it's all right. We all got it. And if anybody misses this show, you can go back and you can watch it. As I've always said, this is not for monetization. This is a hobby, and it's what we enjoy doing, talking to different people. So you'll be able to go back and watch this show, and you can catch up with Austin. I'll, if you want me to, I can put a link to your company or something. And if somebody has some
yeah.
questions,
If you want to,
they could ask you.
it's not gonna apply to most people, but yeah, but yeah, put a link to my company. If they just send an email to the generic company email, they can find me. I'm on LinkedIn if they really have something pressing. They
There
can
you
find
go.
me.
You can find them on LinkedIn. I heard one of the talking heads say there were 3 people in the helicopter: pilot, co-pilot, and a check airman. These guys
So
need to
that's
stop
actually
talking.
that
Is
sounds
that right?
that actually isn't as crazy as it sounds. So And I've also seen it listed where the co-pilot was listed as pilot in command and not Andrew Eves, when Andrew Eves is the instructor pilot.
So he's
So I
PIC.
think I can help. Yeah, so I think I can help kind of dispel some of that too. So the other pilot, again, whose name they're not releasing at the family's request, was a pilot in command and being evaluated as a pilot in command. And so when you do those evaluations on paper, in the logbook, that goes as PC, pilot in command, for the Army. Um, Andrew would have been logging IP. So, those are both pilot in commands. So it looks like that's a little confusing. So if you see, hey, there's a pilot in command, I can understand why you'd be confused about that. The other thing is the crew chief was a standardization, I think a stands instructor. Um, and so
Oh,
that is
makes sense.
that's a crew chief instructor pilot, or a crew chief standardization instructor pilot equivalent. And so they're able to give instructor crew chiefs check rides. Um, and
That
so
makes
that
total
might have
sense.
been the case where they see what that person's duty position is, or they, I don't know, pull their LinkedIn or something, and they see on there that it says, "Hey, I'm a stands instructor," and they're like, "Oh, that's a check airman." And it's like, well, close. So I
For
can
the for
understand
the
why there'd be confusion there.
for the crew chiefs. That's
Mhm.
that's a great job. I appreciate you actually doing that.
Yeah, I mean, they're
Hey.
still idiots, so we can still tell them to stop talking. But
Hey, thanks, gentlemen. Fake news and real intelligence. Philly's being reported as a Learjet. Yes, my wife just sent me that as we're sitting
yeah,
here. Um, yeah, it's kind of funny you talk about that. As I sit in the right seat with a new captain on the NS, it says FO. He'll be the FO, but then he's listed as captain. I mean, it's confusing. Yeah,
yeah. So I can understand why they'd be confused. But
yeah. Learjet 55. Yeah, we're just Lynn Medevac.
man, those fixed
Oh.
wing medevac guys, that's a tough job. Single pilot, and most of the time, single pilot flying those airplanes.
Once again, what made that airplane crash? They hit a UFO. I mean, I swear to
Yeah.
God, they hit a UFO. Yeah. I always say that, and once again, we'll find out the mitigating circumstances, whether it was weather, could have been a fuel issue, mechanical issue. They could have had loss of pressurization. There's so many things that happen in aviation, um,
Yeah.
and I think what makes it so. I mean, 55,000 people die every year in a car wreck, but they just don't die at one moment in time. It's spaced out. So when you have an aviation accident, it doesn't happen very often. It'll be in the news for weeks, and everybody wants to know right away. But I can tell you that it takes a long time to get the black box out for them to, hey, is the black box even destroyed enough, or sound enough to be able to retrieve the data? So there's so much that goes on. Just be patient, change the channel, watch NCIS or something, and then in about in about a month or two, the NTSB will come out with a report. Although China had that 737 crash years ago, and they've never come out with a report on that one, and
Hmm.
I don't think we ever will hear it. Um, Man. So these guys took off. Lynn was just talking about 30 seconds after takeoff, 1,600 feet. Yeah, pediatric patient. That's horrible. So prayers to all those families too, man. That's just a bad week. But then again, how many people die of drug overdoses and all that. It's kind of weird. It's safety, airline safety, and aviation safety has been so fine tuned. I did a podcast with one of my Marines, Andy Dingy, and he wrote a book about airline safety, and it talks about all the old accidents and how we've compounded on top of the old accidents to learn from those mistakes, change our procedures so that you get to the point where how many people go out there, buy a ticket online, cheapest ticket, boop, got it. And they go to the airport and they get on the airplane and they just expect that airplane's going to get from point A to point B. Everybody, 100%, I guarantee it. And they'll wait till the last minute. They have to be somewhere for a funeral. They'll catch that last flight, and unfortunately, they're not looking at the weather, and there's a big line of thunderstorms, and the plane flights get delayed, out of the control of the crew. And then they get really upset and yell at you because you didn't get them to their destination on time when it's kind of out of your hands. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
You
It's
can you can
amazing.
build 1,000 bridges, as they say, right? I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, the fact that we're talking about this is a metric of how good that system is and how good the helo routes and separation there usually works. That they can have,
yeah.
hundreds of thousands of hours logged on those helo routes, and this has never happened before.
Well, I can guarantee you every single pilot flying into DCA from now on is going to be double checking everything. What that guy say? He said something. Did you say
Yeah,
something about a helicopter? What was that flashing light down there? Guarantee you everybody's going to be on their toes. So if
yeah.
anything, it's going to be a lot safer. With that, folks, I guess we will call it quits. And thank you so much for all the comments. Please share, like, and subscribe.
Thanks,
So
Taco.
you bet. Austin, hang out for a second and I'm say goodbye and we'll talk here in a second. All right.
Awesome.
Hoorah.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Well, folks, I certainly do appreciate you guys hanging out for an hour or more. It really is important to have somebody that knows what the hell they're talking about. And Austin knows what he's talking about because he used to do it every day. So, anyway, I want to say thank you guys for joining us, and you all have a great night. We'll definitely get more information as the time passes. Prayers to all the families and what they're going through right now. Having lost my sister, I know what grief they're experiencing tonight, and that's horrible. Till I see you guys next week, I think I have a good show lined up next week. You guys need to come listen to Todd Klein, one of my fellow Marine recon bubbas who went State Department, security, RSO, secret squirrel stuff. Going to be a great show. Tuesday night. Adios. Hasta luego. Sa wiedersehen. Tschüss. Sheshini. Au revoir. Domrigato gozaimasu. Tando shide kurasai. Ciao. Arrivederci. Tashikura. Assalamu alaikum. Mahala. Do vidjenia. Das Vajanya. And I'm going to leave with this one. See you guys.